Hello everyone, my name is Kavya and I am talking to you about the subject research methods for the MAPC psychology course, the MA psychology course in IGNOU's first year program. So IGNOU has a master's in psychology program, and in that, in the first year we have 6 theory subjects, and this is subject number 5 with the code MPC005. The subject is called research methods, and like every subject in the IGNOU's first year course, this subject also has 4 blocks and each block has 1 unit. So now what I'll be doing is I'll be giving you some idea as to how to approach and how to understand each concept in all of these units one by one. This is more from the point of understanding the subject and using it for the sake of the exam. Okay, so I'm also not having a lot of preparation in making this a very perfect video in terms of recording and everything, because the focus here is to help you get the main basic pointers to help you for the exam, which is due to happen in another month. So let's start. So I'm going with the unit 1, which is the introductory unit. It is called as Introduction to Research Methods in Psychology, and in that I'm going with the first chapter, which is the basic process and concepts in research. So this is a very important topic because being master's level course, this course expects all the students to do some kind of research in their second year, and also for your future higher studies, or also even if you want to practice as a psychologist or as a counselor, the background of research can really help you in your future career. So which is why this subject is very important, and I'll be talking about few basics which are important for the exam. So as all of us know, this topic, because it's a basic process and concept in research, this will be talking mostly about research. The objectives of this chapter is to help you understand what research is, understand good research, and also understand how to conduct research. So these are the most important parts. So we start with the definition and meaning of research. So research consists of 2 words, which means again, and search, which means trying to find or to probe or to ask a question. Okay, so I'm going at 1.2, which the heading, which is definition and meaning of research. So I also request all of you to have your textbook, the hard copy or the PDF, and refer to that while listening to this class so that it's easier for you to understand the concept. Okay, so research means repeatedly and closely examine different scientific issues, problems, etc., to get solutions and answers. So it is a careful and systematic and patient study, and we are trying to get facts or answers to our questions. So it is the scientific research process is systematic and it's an objective attempt, and the objective is to discover and develop knowledge to find answers to our questions. So it is also systematic, that is, there is a certain structure to the way you do research. It cannot be in any way that we want. It has to be in a specific way, which we will come to in the following parts. And then it is an empirical analysis. Empirical analysis means there will be some data, and the data will be having certain numbers associated with it. And we will be recording controlled observation. That is, when we do the experiment for research, there will be some controlled setup, controlled experiments, wherein the certain variables will be chosen and the values will be recorded, and this is done to develop theories, concepts or generalization. So the data collection and data analysis is done to form a new theory or a concept or generalize about a certain sample, and also some predictions can be made to understand certain cause effect relationships. So that is what a research does. So you have a certain area which you don't know, then you find the right question, you frame a right question to understand this, and then you try to do certain experiments, and you define how the experiment has to be done, and then you try to find certain answers, record the values, then do the data analysis, see some patterns, and come to some conclusion. So this is what is meant by research. And then the text gives certain definitions given by certain people. I'm not going to go with it. You can just read it if you're interested. So what is a good research? How do you decide what is a good research? The criteria for good research, that is why we are doing it. The purpose should be well defined, and the concepts are also should be operationally defined. What concepts are going to be studied in that, those should also be defined. The second is that the procedure should be properly planned and described well, so that other researchers can also repeatedly do this. The third thing is that the research design should be planned so that there is objectivity in the results that we get. That is, the objectivity means that is when we do a certain type of experiment, we will get only a certain type of result. Then we are talking about the research report. It should be frank and detailed so that anybody who reads it understand what has been found after doing the research. And the data analysis that is done should be the right data analysis so that the significance of the process and the evaluation is properly understood. Also, the validity and reliability of the data should be properly understood and should be examined well. So all these are the criteria of research, of a good research, and especially a few terms like validity and reliability might be new. We'll be seeing these in detail in the following chapters. So these are the criteria of good research. So now we know the meaning of research. Now we know what are the criteria for good research. Now we are trying to understand what are the objectives of good research. So now you know what can be called as a good research. That is a criteria. Now objectives. Why do you do this research? Okay. There are four main reasons or four main objectives to actually do a good research. One is in exploratory research studies. That is to understand in detail, to explore a phenomena. Okay. That is why you do the research. Next is for descriptive research studies, which means once you explore a phenomena in a certain sample, now you need to accurately and very specifically portray what characteristics are there for a particular individual or a group of individuals or a community in that sample. So you do things like the case studies or a detailed study, and that is the descriptive research studies. Third is known as diagnostic research studies. That is, so once you found that, when you're descriptive studies, you have found that something is happening with a particular community. Okay, some case study you've seen. So now you want to see how many people in the community have this. The frequency, that is how many people experience the same thing. Or is it associated with something closely connected to this group of people or the system. So for that you do a diagnostic research study. And the fourth is the experimental study or the hypothesis study. So now you in the previous study you were trying to find the cause or the frequency happening, and now you're trying to explore in detail the cause and come out with a hypothesis that is saying that this is why this happens, or this is why something happens, or saying that a certain research like why do adolescents have more anger issues, or why do children find it difficult to eat food if they don't have screen time. So these kind of things. So the whole description. So this the objectives of good research are to help you understand a certain issue in detail. So that is why we have to see it as a 4 steps: exploratory, descriptive, diagnostic, and experimental. So now you understood the objectives. Now let's understand what all are the qualities of good research. And I'm just going to very briefly say this. I'm definitely looking at the text for this. Good research is systematic, that is, there is some structure to it and there is a specified order or sequence. Next is good research is empirical, that is, there is evidence gathered from experiments, and this also helps to understand the external validity of the research results. Third is that the good research is valid and verifiable, which means there is a precise observation and there is accurate description, and we'll be using only reliable and valid instruments to conduct the research. The reliability and validity also we'll be studying in the following chapters. And there will be some statistical methods to measure the data, and that is also that data analysis can be verified by us or anyone doing the research. That is what is meant by it's valid and verifiable. The third is the research is logical, that is, there is some form of reasoning or sensibility or logic when you do a research, and so that there is some meaning to the research. It helps in developing theories and principles, like what we said earlier. When we see a particular situation, we understand how it is, what factors are important, what are the causes, and then we come to a initial conclusion, which is what we call hypothesis, or we are assuming that something is happening because of this. That is a hypothesis. And when we test further on hypothesis and find reliable and valid results, then we can eventually make it as a theory or as a principle. Research is replicable, it's very important, which is why the research design and how a research has to be planned is very important, so that it can be repeated by anybody when they want. So all these are the qualities of a good research. So it's systematic, empirical, valid and verifiable, logical, can develop theories, hypotheses and principles, and it is replicable. So in the research process, there are few considerations that we need to see. This I haven't seen very important, that this topic is very important from the point of exam. So I'm not going to go in detail in this topic. So in the research process, there are basic considerations. One is the context of discovery, which includes identifying the role of theories or hypotheses. And second is research biases. So research bias means certain prejudice that researchers have or certain prejudice that the research tests have, which can cause some error in the answer. So research bias, so it is also a very big challenge to remain free from any bias. Bias happens because any researcher has certain prejudice because of their social conditioning, because of their personal knowledge, etc. So these biases can also be of different types. Personal bias, which is a person's own conditioning. External influences due to the society and its thoughts about a certain issue. Observer bias, which happens because certain researchers may find certain results more important. And expectancy bias, which can be due to certain background scenarios. So all of these, even placebo bias, for example, like certain even if they don't have medicine, instead if they have sugar pills, they think the treatment is active. So all of these are certain types of bias, and biases can cause errors in the research. Apart from the basic discovery context of research, the another context is context of justification. That is, why are we doing it? So why are we doing the research? So we always associate research with scientific attitude and say that is why research is important. And we also say that there should be some objectivity which is safely kept while doing the research, so that there is some standard process and the research can be replicated for future. So now we are going to go to a very important topic. There are 7 steps in the research process. It is very logical once we understand, and this is a very important question. So I'm going to discuss all these steps in detail. These steps include first identifying the problem. So research means finding answers to some problem. So first step is to identify what you are seeking as a problem. What do you want to answer? For example, in psychology, we are trying to understand things like why do people smile at strangers? That is trying to find out the reason for a certain behavior. Or what are the relationships of certain processes and the behavior, and how one behavior is connected to another. Why do people who smile a lot find partners a lot? I'm just saying some random examples just to understand why psychology or how psychology tries to identify certain problems. And once the problem is identified, it is very important because it is this research question that determines what direction our research process will take. How will the study be designed? Okay, so we have two parts here. So one is understanding the problem, and then the two is to rephrase it or reword it into a logical and meaningful format. So it's not just that, we also need to be very practical when we are identifying the problem. We need to understand what resources we have, what funds we have, and also understand how much time, how much expertise, what knowledge already exists in the past, and also identify if there are any gaps. All of these need to be considered before we decide the problem. So first part is understanding the problem, and second is defining the problem, formulating the right question. So when you formulate the right question, before you formulate the right question, you need to have all these information. And once you have formed a right question, then you're trying to identify the variables or the parameters that you have to measure. So variables means certain quantity which can have different numbers or varies. And we'll be talking about variables and constructs in detail in a following chapter. So variable, for example, variable refers to age or height or weight or sex or gender, something like that. And these variables help us understand behavior. Like for example, if you have to understand, do people have more empathetic, or do people show more kindness according to their age? So age is a variable, and we are trying to connect it to the behavior of kindness. So these are certain examples that we can have as a research problem or the research question. And what we need to see is if these variables, how they will give us an answer. And for this we also take the support of we do the process of literature review, that is study or read and understand what all has happened in this field in the past. So literature review can be through books, through online articles, through offline articles, going to library, all of these. So what actually happens is during this literature review process, we become familiar with the problem and the thematic area that we are trying to understand, and this also helps us select the right and relevant variables for the study. So the first step, that was identifying the problem. So understanding the issue, structuring it in the right way, figuring out what variables we need to measure, and also reading the literature to help a proper research design. The step 2 is formulating a hypothesis. Formulating a hypothesis means we have to form a hypothesis. Hypothesis is what we are going to see a lot in the next subject, which is statistical methods. So hypothesis is a simple statement or a suggestive answer to our problem, and we derive it from past research, and it's like a statement which connects the variables that are being studied. Okay, So hypothesis should be formed before we collect the data. So even when we are doing the next chapter, the statistics chapter, the first step is to form the hypothesis, or what we call as the null hypothesis or the basic hypothesis. And once we collect the data, we are trying to understand if the data matches our hypothesis or not. If the data matches the hypothesis, we accept it, and then we'll see if this can be developed into a theory, or else we reject the hypothesis and then we go for an alternative hypothesis, we make changes. So the next step is identifying, manipulating and controlling variables. So in the first step, when we are trying to identify the problem and formulate a question, we had also talked about variables briefly. We said what variables need to be studied. Okay, so now we are talking in detail about it. So here we are not just identifying which variables, we are also identifying the type of variables. So we have three types of variables: the independent variable, dependent variable and extraneous variable. These also we will be studying in detail in the future chapters, but for a basic idea, independent variable is something that actually causes an effect. The dependent variable is usually the effect, and that depends on how the independent variable changes. For example, time is an independent variable, and dependent variable is after how much time do children grow into the adulthood. So that growth into adulthood is the cause, and the time is the independent variable. And extraneous variable is actually not being controlled. So during research, the researcher tries to control and manipulate the independent variable and see how it changes the dependent variable, how it brings changes in the dependent variable. And what they are also trying to do is they're controlling the independent variable to see the control. Independent variable is the cause, so there is control on the independent variable, and the effect is the dependent variable. There could be a certain third variable which is called as extraneous variable that is not being controlled by the researcher, but it can still produce some effect on the dependent variable, or it can produce some effect. So at this point you just need to know these as terms. We'll be discussing these in detail in the following chapters. So in the research process, now you've understood that the first step is identifying the problem, second is formulating a hypothesis, third is identifying, manipulating and controlling variables. Now the fourth step is formulating a research design. That means now we have to test the relationship between the variables, and for this we are trying to use this research design to get the answer to our questions. So in this we have to consider the logistical arrangements. We are going to consider how are we going to actually manipulate the variables. We previously decided what variables we'll be using. Now we have to decide how we are going to manipulate variables. How are we going to measure the changes caused due to manipulating the variables? How are we going to find the valid findings, compare it and reach conclusions? So the research design formulation comes in two parts. One is constructing device for observation and management. That is, how are we going to test these variables? So for that, in psychology, a very commonly used method is using questionnaires for survey or interviews. Okay, so that is how those are the devices that we are using for getting our observation or getting the values of our variables. The second part of the research design formulation is sample selection and data collection. So on who are we going to do this variable testing? On who are we going to study this cause and effect relationship? That is our sample. So how do we select the sample? Who is going to be sampled? As in to whom do we go and ask these questions? Maybe we are choosing men or women, or we are choosing people according to their age. So something like that. The next step is data analysis and interpretation. So once we have once the research design helps us to decide what tool to use and which population to be tested with. Then we have the data that we collect, we make the observations and data, and now we are going to analyze the data using certain statistical tools, which could be either quantitative or qualitative methods. And once we have the data, you might have heard of these terms like, or there are terms like univariate analysis, bivariate analysis, or multivariate analysis. So that is, so if it is a univariate analysis, only one characteristic is being analyzed. Bivariate is two characteristics. When more than two characteristics are being analyzed, that is known as multivariate. So all of these are depending on the kind of data that we have selected, the kind of tools that we have selected. So the research design that we decided previously, that helps us in also doing the data analysis and then the interpretation, that is finding some result out of it. And now we have the overall result, and now the next step is to draw conclusion or make a statement. So initially we had a hypothesis. Now we are going to see if that hypothesis is true, and if that hypothesis is true, then we make the conclusion and extend it to the general population. So the hypothesis that we have done it for the sample on whom we did the testing, and now we are going to extend it to everyone in the population. And the next step is preparing report and publishing it. So when we prepare a report, we have to write all these in detail. So once you know how to do the research process properly, then you just follow those steps and then write the report, and then we need to publish it so that general public can access this information, and they also, other researchers can also access this information. They can improve their knowledge in the subject, and if they want, they can also repeatedly test it and see the reliability and validity of this. So that is this whole process. So we were talking about all the 7 steps of the research process. Now I want to tell you this with the help of a simple example. First step is identifying a problem. So let us consider we are having a problem. We are trying to understand about cavities in people's teeth. So to understand cavities in people's teeth, how do we understand? So the first step is identifying the problem. So we cannot just randomly say identify about cavities. So we are trying to connect it to some cause and effect, and that is how we make a problem statement or a question. So something like, we can say, does tooth flossing affect the number of cavities? So that is our question. So tooth flossing means cleaning of tooth using the floss thread. So does tooth flossing affect the number of cavities? That is our first step, identifying a problem. We have kept a problem. The next step is formulating a hypothesis. So now we are going to make a hypothesis. Okay. So our hypothesis, for example, let's make a hypothesis or a statement that we say, and our statement is that tooth flossing affects the number of cavities. It could be, it can increase the number of cavities or it can decrease, but we are saying it affects, it does affect. So that is our hypothesis. Next step is identifying and manipulating and controlling the variables. So here we are going to take an independent variable, that is tooth flossing duration. For how long are you going to continue doing the tooth flossing? And now you need a dependent variable, and that is the number of cavities during 3-month duration. So for example, you're taking a population and telling them to do continuously do flossing every day for 3 months, and then you're telling checking and you're then asking them how long did you do? Did you do it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that, and then you're measuring the number of cavities. So independent variable is here tooth flossing duration. The dependent variable here is the number of cavities across 3 months. And we also heard about extraneous variable, that is a variable which we are not measuring or we are not controlling, but that can have an effect on the dependent variable. So here I am taking the consumption of sugary foods. So we are not going to control if any of the sample that we are going to test, if they are going to have sugary foods or not, but we know that that could affect the number of cavities. So that is an extraneous variable here. So now we have reached the third step. The next fourth step is formulating the research design. In that, the two tools that we said already, constructing device for observation and measurement, and the second tool is the sample selection. So your first tool is constructing device. So here you have a questionnaire or a survey or an interview wherein you are asking people the flossing duration, number of times they have done their flossing, etc. And the sampling, we can do it, say maybe you're doing it sampling across teenagers, or you're doing sampling across infants, or sampling only for adults. So you can, that's how you decide the research design, both the tools and the sample. And the fifth step is data analysis and then interpretation. So in that data analysis, now you're going to use certain quantitative tools and then analyze and find out if there is a relationship actually between flossing, the act of flossing, and the number of cavities found. And this is where you will be using the null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, which we will be learning in the statistics chapter, the next statistics subject, the next subject. And once we have the data, then we draw conclusion. For example, we see that higher frequency of flossing, we see less cavities. Then we say that, okay, if there is, if we do flossing, the hypothesis, flossing affects cavities. So we can say that flossing will positively affect or reduce the number of cavities, and then this is made into a report, and then this is publicized, and then toothpaste or the flossing companies can give us ads saying that, okay, if you floss your teeth regularly, then you will have less cavities. So that is how this whole research process goes. So that is how the research process happens. So research is very important in psychology, because these empirical and theoretical researches help us understand more about different aspects of psychology, helps in understanding the concepts. This also has practical gains, like many discoveries that we need to make, all of these need to come in. And even the experimental methods are used, especially because the experimental methods help to understand behavior better, help to provide solutions, help to provide testing methods, help to provide solutions to heal. So all of these. So therefore, research is very important in psychology. So with that, we complete the first unit of block 1 of research methods. Thank you.